We're trying to get the athletes stronger for their sport. So that's the huge consideration there. And I know that their training volume is less intense and there's less volume there. So I could actually push them a little bit more than I would in the in season. So I usually like to do full body splits 3 to 4 times a week. So if I do, let's say, lower body all on one day, they're just going to be wrecked for their following training sessions. So full body every day to not get that much soreness. And I usually do a push-pull block, upper lower, push-pull, upper lower, and then like accessory block. And then usually 1 to 2 times a week, I'll also have a plyometric block in the beginning.
The Fitness Movement is brought to you by Zor Fitness. We offer coaching and individualized program design, as well as educational content for coaches and athletes. It's all at one place, zorfitness.com. Well, welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking through strength and conditioning for triathlon training and triathletes. So we got Day back on the show. And Day, really quickly, explain to people like what your role is with the triathlon team at Arizona.
Yeah, so at Arizona, I am the strength and conditioning coach for the triathlon team. So they have their own sports-specific practices with running, swimming, biking, all that stuff, led by the head coaches. And I'm basically a support staff if you want to look at it that way. And I work with the team about 3 to 4 times a week with their strength training supplementation to their overall sports practice.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm super excited to talk to you. I have done some triathlon training. Coming out of college, I actually did, I don't know if you want to call it 2 seasons, but I did several events, and it was kind of over the course of like 2 years. So I at least have my foot into that. I built up to a half Ironman when I did that, but like most of the stuff was like sprint or Olympic, so a little bit on the shorter side of things. So I think we could probably gear more of the conversation to like Olympic distance, because if I'm not mistaken, is that what college does?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Correct.
just double checking. Sweet. So college is doing an Olympic distance, 1.5K swim, 40K bike, 10K run. So I believe like 0.8 miles, like 40-ish, and then a 10K 6.2 mile run. So quite a bit of volume. And obviously the training for that is going to be, it's going to vary throughout the time of year. We can get into the details of that specifically, but obviously you're training for a sport where you have to race across a long time. I mean, like you're going to just do a lot of volume. So especially when you got 3 different disciplines in running, biking, swimming. So the big picture, let's start more of like, before we even get into like off season for like the strength conditioning side of things, I think there's going to be people listening who have a pretty good grasp on it. If there's someone who's a triathlete and they're listening to this as a triathlete, they're already going to know obviously what their training entails. But let's pretend this is someone who's listening who maybe has limited triathlon experience and they're like building in distances and like getting more exposure and like wanting to sign up for events, something like along those lines, or just like a coach who's interested in like training an athlete who's maybe not like a full-time triathlete and they just like, again, maybe like want to enter events, or you know, more like a coach who's like helping an athlete gear up for that. So giving that person a little bit additional context, like what does, you know, what kind of a training volume, like ballpark are we thinking about? Like how much time, and like, you don't have to go into the specifics of mileage or anything like that, but like just getting a feel for like how much training these athletes are actually doing on a weekly basis.
Yeah, for strength training specifically, their volume, that's I think the biggest factor in considering triathletes. So a lot of other sports, we have the typical 3 to 4 times a week on their off season, right? And we consider their training volume for their specific sport. And it's a consideration, obviously, but with triathlon, especially because their volume is so high with swimming, biking, running, and all that, their strength training is dictated a lot by that. So there's different mindsets, and from what I've learned from a bunch of strength coaches who have been working with professional triathletes, and I've seen different sides of it. Some people go on the side of 3 times a week for 40 to 60-minute sessions, right? So that's pretty typical for a strength coach. And then there's some that actually like to do like a microdosing approach of like 20 minutes every day,
Yeah.
about 5 to 7 times a week. So it's a lot less intense sessions, more about moving the body, doing more banded mobility work, things like that,
Hmm.
versus the other 3, 4 times a week sessions that are longer, um, have more strength training components to it, where they're working a little bit more with free weights and things like that. So two different mindsets for that approach. The approach I like to take, it depends on the athlete, depends on the time of season, depends on how they're feeling and all that, and how their practices are looking in their performance. But I usually keep it to the 3 times a week model, with 40 minutes per session.
Yeah.
Um, so I
Eh,
like to keep it there, and I like to auto regulate it as needed.
yeah. That makes a lot of sense because, again, in your setting, you're going to be likely working with at least a chunk of the athletes or the entire team potentially at once. Where it's like, in order for, like, I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but like you're a coach and like the team's like scheduling a block with you. So it makes sense that they're going to kind of come in and like do a chunk of work versus like you're not going to show up and have, do 20 minutes of something and then like send them off again. Like practically, it's not really going to work that way super well. So it makes more sense if you're in a more structured team environment like that, where you're going to take like a block of time to like dedicate a little bit more to it. And then potentially if you're someone who is just listening to this where you're like doing it on your own, it's like I spend majority of my time doing this and it's like, I try to get like the 2 hours of quality sunlight that's left in my day after I get off work, like to get that in right away. And then it's like I do my odds and ends once I get back, or maybe before, to get additional warm up. That might make more sense to take like that microdosing approach if you're someone like on that end. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Right. And I think with the microdosing approach too, if you're doing it on your own, you don't have like a coach there going through instruction, bringing you through your warm up, doing all these things, versus when you're working with the team and you have a coach there, they're explaining the workouts, the flow of it, movement patterns, all that, and doing more coaching. So there's that time is built into that too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, when you're an in-person coach, you want to be able to take advantages of the inherent advantage that is that having like instant feedback and like hands-on and like being able to demo exercises and all of that stuff that you're not going to have if you don't have that in-person environment. So, yeah, for
Right.
sure. What kind of like a training split is frequent for triathletes? Like how often are they actually in the pool? Again, this is going to vary, so maybe you just can give us like a snapshot of whenever you want throughout their year. But like, how often are they actually in the pool? How often are they on the bike? How often are they running? Like, how many touches are they getting in a week of like different disciplines potentially?
Yeah, so they're getting a lot of touches, and intensity varies throughout the week. So different coaches do different things. I know a lot of old school coaches like the volume approach, where the more the better. And then there's the more newer school approach, I guess you could say, where they do look kind of like a wave loading throughout the week. So it goes higher and low, like moderate, high, take a break. So it's like a 2-3 approach.
Hmm.
They take a break midweek, and then it goes back to moderate, high, low, or low, moderate, high, and it builds
Yeah.
up, and then it goes to the start of the week. And they're touching upon around two disciplines every day, whether that's running, biking, or any type of variation. So they're getting a lot of touches there. And I know with some athletes specifically, they'll touch upon more depending on where their weaknesses are and all that. So, but they are doing a lot of volume with each throughout the week several times.
Yeah, and this is where it probably could get really complicated. Like as you get closer to like your event or like your season, you're gonna probably do more of those 2 or 3 discipline days where like you're maybe doing a longer, like majority of your workout might be on the bike, but then you like end with some harder running intervals or something to like work the transition from bike to run, because like often the transitions are where people get into trouble. But then obviously that's going to, yeah, not be as much of a, like you're going to think about it more of a physiology like training type approach versus like a racing approach, like the further away you are from a competition. And again, for a lot of people, they're just building up to the point where they can actually complete the distance. So like it's more of a risk mitigation approach where they're thinking about, I'm trying not to cramp when I get off the bike and I start to run for the first time. And it's like, when you're at a duration or like, volume that you're not used to being at. So I think that's very different than the college athletes that you're working with who are like literally racing the entire time through the event.
Yeah.
So
You mentioned about like cramping after like the bike, right? Going into the run. And that's like one thing that as I was learning more about the sport, the head coaches were like telling me about like that's a huge focus. Like we're trying to mitigate that at all cost, right? So strength
yeah,
training comes into play there to get those girls, to get the athletes stronger.
and it's there's not like a super straightforward answer for that because like different athletes deal with like cramping for different reasons, and it's usually again for like the level of athlete that we're talking about here, or that Day's working with, it's not like they're unaccustomed to doing that amount of work. It's just that it's literally the fact that they're racing it and then having to immediately basically transition into the run. Like the turnaround time is basically zero. Like those transitions are so quick, they have everything so dialed in that it's like it's more of a matter of like getting blood flow to redirect correctly. And if that doesn't happen quick enough, that can result in cramping sometimes. And you'll see that sometimes even with if I go back to my world, like the CrossFit athletes, you'll see them do like thrusters and then they'll go to do chest to bar and their biceps will cramp because like the blood flow just didn't redirect. It's not because like their biceps didn't have enough sodium or something like really specific. It's like, I don't know. So again, I think it even depends what type of athlete you're working for. Whereas like if someone's just building up to that volume, it might just be a matter of like, yeah, you're having so much DOMs by the time you get to that point that you're just kind of destroyed.
Yeah.
Let's go off-season training first. You kind of mentioned that you might take 3 sessions through a week, and that's going to be, more intensive than maybe someone might do if they're just on their own and kind of doing some casual, accessory type stuff for triathlon to keep them healthy. But kind of run us through what might a split or an actual session look like in like more of off-season mode for triathlon athletes.
Yeah. For off season, I like to focus on like just building strength, movement patterns. I don't try to overcomplicate it there, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to get the athletes stronger for their sport. So that's the huge consideration there. And I know that their training volume is less intense and there's less volume there. So I could actually push them a little bit more than I would in the in season. So I usually like to do full body splits 3 to 4 times a week. So if I do, let's say, lower body all on one day, they're just going to be wrecked for their following training sessions. So full body every day to not get that much soreness. And I usually do like a push pull block, upper lower, push pull upper lower, and then like accessory block. And then usually 1 to 2 times a week, I'll also have a plyometric block in the beginning. So if I'm doing, let's say, a horizontal push on day one, like a benching variation or push-up variation or something like that, the second day we'll have a vertical push block exercise, right? So just making sure that I have enough of those exercises distributed throughout the week. Another thing too that I consider is working on the demands of the sports, right? Swimming demands, biking and running demands. So for swimming, they need to have a strong shoulder girdle. So we do a lot of exercises to strengthen that. For biking, the concentric lower body power that they need as they pedal throughout. So focusing on a lot of single leg work, unilateral work, is a big consideration with the sport there. And then with running, I do a lot of core work for running. There's obviously a million things to consider for running, but one of the main things I like to consider is having like a strong dynamic core control. So when they're running, they're not wobbling around, right? They're keeping nice and tight, energy not being dissipated as they're going there. So having that control. So things like that are the things I focus on. So main movement patterns, making sure it's distributed throughout the week, accessory block to complement the demands of the sport, and sprinkle in some plyometrics like overhead med ball throws, some like hurdle or pogo jumps or something like that. Low impact plyometrics.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So when I'm thinking about this and making sense of it, I think again, potentially if we have people who are like really well versed in like the strength realm of things and they're listening, they might be like, wow, this is super simplistic. And it's like, yes, it is. And that's exactly the point. Like if you were to take like a power lifter and you're going to have them do some off-season conditioning, guess what it's going to be? It's going to be like the most basic things. It's going to be like, all right, go on and like do a 20-minute air bike at like a conversational pace. Like that's going to be like their off-season conditioning. Whereas like, if you flip it around for an endurance athlete, it's like they just need exposures to the basic movement patterns and do that consistently to make sure that they're, again, putting enough tension through the musculature and through those joints that they're maintaining the patterns that they need, and you're not trying to make them a power lifter, which is something that we had actually talked about in a previous episode, which is, it can be like frustrating sometimes as a strength conditioning coach. Like you really want to push people, but sometimes you just need to stick with the basics and run with that.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Like I'm not trying to have them max out on a deadlift or anything like that. It's getting them stronger overall, relative strength, absolute strength to some degree, and then all those accessory works, the correct imbalances. And another consideration too is that the triathlon team I work with is the all-female team, and a lot of them they're actually like really, really experienced triathletes. So it's pretty cool. A lot of them are coming from all over the world. I think we have Argentina, Brazil, Europe, like all over the map. And these girls are winning national races and all that. But a lot of them don't have like dedicated strength training. Like they've never been exposed to it. So this may be like the first step into a weight room. So I'm not going to go and throw something at them that is like, what the heck? Because they may not even be able to squat properly, especially if they've never been in a weight room and they've been doing just triathlon. They're going to have like imbalances in their shoulders. Their hip girdle might be a little bit off. They're going to have tight ankles, all those things. So it's really working on correcting those things to get them, like you said, stronger overall for their sport.
Yeah, and like one of the things you have to consider is like a strength conditioning coach is like, what's the cost of like learning an exercise versus like the reward that you're going to get out of it? Like, is it worth it to teach the triathlon team how to power snatch? Like, probably not. By the time you have them for 4 years and they're out the door, like, hey, you finally learned how to power snatch and you graduated. It's like you have to be able to provide like exercises that give them a good effect right away. But I think at the same time, you can do that in a way where you do hit the fundamental movement patterns, like you're saying, like teaching them how to hinge properly and doing some RDLs and putting some good time and retention on the hamstrings. Like it's going to have great sport benefits. And it's like, that's also something that like learning how to hinge properly is like something that will also help you have longevity in your sport. It doesn't take forever either. It's like that good sweet spot of like hitting all the fundamentals.
Right.
Yeah. How does that shift then from going off season as you approach or even get into the season?
Yeah. So one thing that I didn't mention is off season, I'll do tempo work, right? Eccentrically load them, tempo on the eccentric. So as they're lowering in a squat and all that. So create that tension and that movement. One, because we're trying to build some muscle and strength there. So that helps with that. And also two, if it's their first time doing these exercises, they better positioning, right? They start learning how to control the weight a little bit more, start moving better. So I like to add that. As we go into in season, I take away the eccentric portion of it, tempos, just because that causes a lot of soreness. So we're trying to avoid some soreness there. So taking that away, focusing a little bit more on concentric movements. So that's where I'll add a little bit more plyometrics there. So plyometrics, more concentric movements, and then also decreasing the volume a bit as they start preparing more for their specific races. And they all race different times and all that, so it's managing that too. So as they get closer to their race, the volume will decrease a bit, and usually they'll take like a deload leading up to it for the week, and they'll do light touches of things like banded mobility work and all that. But yeah, so instead of doing 3 to 4 times a week that I do in the in-season with eccentric stuff and all that tempo work, we start going into in-season about twice a week. And then with a little bit more strategy leading up to those specific races, more plyometrics, more concentric focus exercises. Yeah, those are the big changes with that.
Yeah. Could you give like a specific example of like it changing from like an eccentric biased movement, and maybe you can explain what that is to people, like what's the eccentric, to then what would be a concentric focused movement, or how that might like practical example of like how that shifts?
Yeah. So eccentric movement, what I'll do is I'll put tempo on the eccentric portion of an exercise. So eccentric is usually when the muscle is lengthening. So think about when you're lowering a squat, your muscles are lengthening in that position. Then the concentric is coming up from that. So in off season, I'll add like, let's say goblet squats with a 4 seconds tempo on the lowering. So they're lowering with that kettlebell close to their chest, going down 4 seconds, and then they come up normal tempo, right? So because of that, it elicits a stimulus that usually causes soreness the day after. So that's a lot of bodybuilders use eccentric tempos so that they could build muscle, right? Because that time under tension. As we move into in season, we start taking away those tempos and start focusing more on concentric stuff. So one thing I like to do is sled drag, right? Because that's a concentric motion. Lengthening of there's no lengthening of the muscle because it's just basically pushing the whole time, right? And then plyometrics too focuses a lot on that concentric power. So those are like hopefully that gives a little bit better explanation of those.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and also like yeah, as you said, like the volume's gonna start to come down. The actual like biasing of the different phases of the movement are going to change, so you'll focus more on, again, as you said, the concentric kind of shortening portion of the movement, and you're kind of pushing some of the envelope in terms of like actually having a recovery demand, probably just a little bit less as a whole, through volume, but also through like, again, like the something like a concentric only movement, like a sled push, is going to have less recovery demands than a goblet squat with a super slow eccentric where they're going to have soreness the next day. So all those things
Right.
in combination with one another can definitely start to shift that athlete towards having less stress around their strength conditioning side of things so that they can kind of push that into their, actual sport.
Right. And like one thing to consider is like I'll still do, let's say squats. They still have an eccentric portion to them
Yeah.
in season. I'm just not adding that tempo. So they're still getting that eccentric portion of it, but the concentric is really the focus there. Coming fast up, so being a little bit more powerful, but yeah, so it just changes a little bit. But I like to keep also the similar exercises in season and off season for the most part,
Yeah.
just because of neurological demand of it, right? They're not dedicated strength athletes. That's not their sport. So they don't have the time I don't want to spend a lot of those neurological demands of teaching them something new every 4 weeks, every cycle, right? So I like to keep things similar so that they go in there and they're getting the most of those exercises and that they're getting, goblet squat or squat variation that's very similar. We're not trying to make this complicated. If you're a CrossFit athlete, you're going to have some variation because you need to learn it, and that's part of your sport is learning these different movements.
Yeah, I'm just picturing like a strength conditioning coach like teaching like their NFL players how to you know do like dumbbell snatches or something in like the middle of their season, and it's like you would never do that. Like you
Right.
just stick with like the basics of like, hey, you already know this. You're already gonna get the stimulus that we're looking for out of this. It's not gonna require any more mental bandwidth. It's literally like you come in, you can focus on it, but then check it off to a certain extent where it's like that's literally sort of the purpose of a strength conditioning coach during that phase of the year. Which again can be
Yeah.
tough for some people's egos, but I think if you realize where you're at and like what the purpose is, then it's a helpful reality.
Yeah,
Reality
exactly. And
check.
I think people get caught up with switching exercises every so often. If it looks the same as it did or similar as it did a few months ago, then something has to change and all this. But it's like their sport is triathlon. Them doing changing exercises all the time and like that's not what their focus is. So like
Yeah.
I want them to get those movement patterns. I want it to be less stressful during that time so that they could put more emphasis on their sport. And like you said about dumbbell snatches, they're D1 athletes, all those students there. So they're great at their sport. And I've seen some of the ugliest dumbbell snatches I've ever seen. And I'm not a coordinated person, right?
Yeah.
Because like, and it's just sometimes it's like it takes time to teach, um, and all that. And whether you're teaching a normal CrossFit class at a local gym or teaching D1 athletes, like that takes time to teach and learn. And if
Mhm.
you want that exercise to be implemented in your program, you're going to have to dedicate time to teaching it and for them to learn it and grasp it. And that should be done in the off season, not in the in season.
Do you have a topic that you'd like to request as a future show or just a question about training? Reach out to me. My email is ben@zorfitness.com, or you can DM me on Instagram @zorfitness. Lastly, head over to zorfitness.com if you want to browse all of our previous shows with in-depth show notes as well as educational content for all things training. So, do you think more about just like having good fundamental movement patterns and like moving well as like creating a injury mitigation component to their training, or is it, do you have like other exercises that you like to add in that are like a quote unquote like bulletproofing type exercises? And not that it has to be either or, but like where do you land on that?
Yeah, actually, I like to mix both of them up because I think those foundational movement patterns, it's like they need that for it to create strength and balance and all that. But then they're going to need the bulletproofing. I think is extremely important to them, and that's where I usually add that stuff in the their accessory block towards the
Yeah.
end. You'll see they'll have the 2 blocks of upper lower exercises around 3 to 5 sets, um, all that. And then their last block is usually core stuff with those accessory bulletproofing exercise. I think that's really important for them, especially because what you'll notice is if one of the athletes has more of a swimming background than a running background, they're a better swimmer. You'll notice, like I mentioned earlier, like imbalances in their shoulder. So they're going to need to do a lot of things to kind of get that scapular control there, and with their ankles too, a lot of ankle stiffness, and that's with runners as well. But working on those things, doing knee health stuff, working on the knees, all the different joints. So I do include that. That's a big part of their exercise of their program throughout the year, in
Yeah.
season and off season.
Yeah. Maybe just like run us through just like a few examples. You don't have to be exhaustive by any means, but like maybe just a few examples of like exercises, and then just like briefly describe them to people. We don't have to bore people with it, but like, again, you
Yeah,
said like shoulder health, knee health, ankle mobility. Maybe just stick with those for now. What would be some examples of like the your kind of go-to
yeah.
exercises there?
So, for example, one of the I'm thinking right now of their current program on like I think it's like day 2 of the week. They have one of their blocks is just the accessory work is bent leg calf raises, work on the soleus, and that's usually beneficial for runners. So working on that muscle, that soleus muscle, is essential for them. So building strength in that. And then it goes, so that's the lower body accessory work. And then the upper body accessory work will be prone YTWLs. So YTWLs, working on the shoulders, you're just doing the Y, TWL. I'm not
Drawing,
gonna
literally drawing letters.
yeah, yeah.
Why
You
is do
literally draw your body. But working on building that all the little stabilizer shoulder muscles there. So that's like one block, and then they'll do like 3 sets of that. Another accessory block that I'm thinking of right now is like doing hamstring curls, some knee flexion that's for the hamstring. Uh, and again, that's for mostly for the running part of it. So I'll do like leg curl machine or banded leg curls or something of that sort. Cuban press for the shoulders. So I like doing that one a lot. Again, these are all Cuban press, lightweight, all that. It's not like something you load up. And then Copenhagen's off of the bench for the adductors drawing muscle there. So just a few different exercises I like to keep in their program. But those are some examples that I add in.
Yeah. No, but that makes a ton of sense. Like doing a few exercises around like the core joints that are not only like prime movers, but then also like the most injury prone in that sport. Like, okay, you're doing a ton of like pulling reps like through the water for swimming. It's like, okay, it probably makes sense to give them some external rotation work because a lot of that is biased towards the internal rotation. So doing some YTWs to stabilize their, scapula, and to learn how to move outside of that specific range of motion is only going to be super helpful and help them to be healthy throughout the long term. So, no, I think those are great examples, and it kind of gives us a snapshot of what it might look like. One more thing that we wanted to mention was just what Day's done in terms of like testing for these triathletes. So I don't really have any background on this, so Day, I'll just let you jump right into it.
All right, cool. So some testing stuff that I do with the athletes beforehand, just to kind of see where they're at, just to get a benchmark. And from there, at the end of the program, we again do the testing, see where the improvements are and all that, and see the progress that they made. But just to go through a few of them, we do like a dowel overhead squat. And usually when I give these, I don't give much instruction. I just want to see how they move. So, because if I give them instruction, one, they're either going to overthink it or they're going to be conscious of it and then start doing things that they don't normally do. So I just give them a dowel. I demonstrate it quickly once and then have them do it. And when they're doing that, I'm looking at their ankle, hip, thoracic mobility, right? And I usually film it so I have it before, like a before and after. Another thing I do too is a lateral step down from a box. So they just have one foot on the box. They're doing a lateral step down. And again, that's more of a mobility focused one. And that's where I just assess the movement of their trunk, knee, and ankle. So nothing crazy there, but those are two mobility ones that I like to do. I do a max plank hold, and that is just to see their core strength, relative strength there. So because we do a lot of core work with them, that's in their accessory block, there is a lot of core. Anti-rotation, midline, side bending things. So I like to see where they're at with their core control, because that's extremely important with all three of the sports, right? In most sports, you want a strong core. And then we do an inverted row, and usually that's just for strength of the upper body. And for other teams, I usually keep it like either a bench or overhead press or something like that. But like we mentioned before and earlier in this podcast, I'm not looking for them to be great strength athletes, right? So I try to stay away from the barbell work and all that, and knowing that they're coming in with little to no weight room experience. I'm just going to do an inverted row, and then, just to see their pulling strength, because that's extremely important for swimming, and relative body strength. And I kind of want to see how they approach that exercise, right? Like if they're able to control their body as they're doing the inverted. And then lastly, for lower body strength and power, I'm using force plates for that. So we actually just got new force plates at the University of Arizona. So that's like the hot thing.
Ooh, cool.
Now, yeah. So that's how I'll be testing out their lower body strength.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, again, for testing for someone who's not a strength athlete, it's like, again, if you think about risk of testing a 1RM back squat, it's like, again, why? Like, the only thing you're going to do there is like, stroke your own ego and like hurt the athlete potentially. Where it's like, here's an environment in like an inverted row or something. It's like very controlled. It's easy to standardize. You can do minimal warm up and go to max effort, and you're still not gonna, like, the risk of injury is extremely low. But yet at the same time, it's a good correlate to like, okay, if this improves, likely general strength is improved, likely specific upper body strength and like horizontal pulling is improved. So it's like a great correlate with all these other things that we want to test and measure. So that makes a ton of sense. I also think that overhead squat and a box step down are great tests for running, especially, and likely even if someone is like a cyclist, for example, they're probably just going to have spent so many hours on a bike that they're going to be dealing with some mobility restrictions, and likely if they're the type of person that self-selects to do an endurance sports, you probably have a little bit less natural rigidity and tension anyway. Otherwise, you'd probably select to do like a strength sport. So it probably makes sense that they have less general stability and tension around, hips and ankles and like the structures that are supposed to be, able to actually create the, rigidity that they need to move properly. So I think those two are great tests that kind of, again, shotgun a lot of the body groups that you were mentioning. Yeah, let's end with one more thing that I think people listening might be interested to hear, and that's people who are doing CrossFit who maybe just want to do a triathlon, because a good chunk of the people listening are CrossFit athletes or CrossFit coaches or somehow involved in that community, at least to a degree. So we're kind of coming at this blind a little bit, but maybe we can just brainstorm a little bit. Let's say we have a CrossFit athlete. They're sort of recreationally competitive, where they might do like a comp like once or twice a year, like a partner comp, local type thing. And they have, a triathlon that's signed up for that's 2 months away or 3 months away. What should CrossFit and strength conditioning training potentially look like for someone like that going into like their build up for an event like triathlon?
Yeah, if they're they're moving away from dedicated CrossFit training to more triathlon.
Let's just say that they signed up for an event, they're going to do this, and they're probably eventually going to go back to CrossFit, and they're not like a games athlete or anything. It's just like, a regular gym goer who is like, hey, instead of like signing up for this partner comp that I do sometimes, I'm going to do a sprint triathlon. And, I've never done that sort of distance or really geared up for that, but like, what should be, hey, Dave, what are some of the things I should be ready for, or like think about, or how should I alter my training?
Yeah. If they're doing CrossFit now and then they want to go and do a sprint triathlon or something.
Yeah.
They're going to need to obviously start practicing the sport, right? So swimming more, running, and biking more. So obviously that's going to take up time, and it'll take away time from their original CrossFit training. So that's a consideration, right? Because there's going to be a lot of volume added to that.
So I should just add that on top of what I'm 5 days a week CrossFit classes, and then I just add the triathlon right on top, right? That's how I should do that.
If you're not burning yourself every day, you're really not doing anything. So yes, definitely start take like a phased approach as you're adding more triathlon training. Start dwindling back on that CrossFit stuff, because that's now you have different priorities. And I think paying attention to your recovery is going to be the biggest thing. Seeing how much you can handle with the difference in load. With that too, you're going to need to pay attention more to the intensity. So if you go to CrossFit classes at a local gym, most of the time intensity varies, right? Sometimes some gyms like to just go hard every day, and so it depends on what gym you go to, but you have to pay attention to that intensity. So you don't want to go hard redlining every day and then have your triathlon practice on top of that. So that's where actually I would kind of go away from traditional CrossFit training, but use the principles of CrossFit in terms of strength training. So if you're good at barbell movements and you're proficient in them and you have that strength background, then you could keep barbell work in there, but keep it more on a maintenance side of it versus building strength and maxing out and keeping at that high intensity.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And then adding accessory work for all those little muscles that are involved in triathlon. That's a big thing too. Also, if you're doing triathlon training, you're going to be doing your endurance work will be dedicated to that, and the swimming, biking, and running. So, if you're doing that and then you're going into a Metcon that's rowing or biking and a bunch of burpees and all that, just remember that there's going to be interference effect with that. So if you're trying to optimize your triathlon training, you may have to cut back on those Metcons and be more conscious about that. So I would actually go triathlon practice, right? And then your CrossFit will be more strength and conditioning, or more strength focused versus Metcons day after day.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me take a quick stab at this too. I mean, I would totally agree with everything that you said. And I would really underscore the fact that, like, if you're choosing to do this, it's instead of something else, not on top of something else. Because again, I think that's just like, we laughed at that, but that's like 100% true. Like, what people will try to do is like, oh, well, I'll do this. We'll just, go for a 30-minute run after class. And it's like, no, that's not how this is going to work. I mean, you could maybe do that, and maybe you even get away with it and you don't have any injuries, but it's just like, you're going to be slogging through your triathlon and just kind of hoping you finish. Whereas like, and you just got to kind of know yourself and know where you're at. Like, if you're someone who's like, I really like going to class and I enjoy that, and I also want to do this event and I just, want to finish it and feel okay about myself at the end of the whole thing. It's like, well, okay, maybe you pull back twice a week and you do class 3 times a week instead of 5, and you do some easy based, running, swimming, and biking on. And again, you don't have to do all 3, but like figure out how you could structure a program that's like easy work on those days. Or if you're someone who like actually wants to perform well on it, it's like, well, then you just can't do both. And it's like, it'll be there when you come back, and maybe you include some of that, again, accessory type stuff, or even like, again, as long as you're hitting some fundamental patterns and you're someone who's got the experience, like you could do more complex lifts. Like you could be doing, power cleans and push presses and stuff before you do a run. And that's going to be completely fine if you already know how to do those things and the volume's not crazy, but you're not going to be doing, 5 rounds for time or something and then go do any quality work after it. Like you just can't do a Metcon and then also do a bunch of triathlon training on top of that. So it's like, okay, if you want to do some of the sport movements, like maybe you have an EMOM of like where you do a couple toes to bar, a couple, dumbbell snatches, a couple GHDs. And it's like, as long as the volume doesn't get crazy and that's like your touch on the things to keep everything sharp when you come back to it. And then you like put your stress towards the stuff that you actually want to get better at. In the meanwhile, then it's like that's all well and good. So that'd be my 2 cents is I kind of think people just need to know themselves and like actually know how important it is to you, because a lot of people who do endurance events don't really care all that much. They just want to be able to say that they did it, which is totally fine. You just got to be at least a little bit smart about it when you do it.
Right.
Sweet. Well, Day, thanks for doing this. Is there any final words that you have for people in terms of like, again, maybe a recreational athlete, in terms of like a recreational triathlete who they're trying to figure out and navigate their strength conditioning? Is there any like big picture principles or things that they should keep in mind as they're trying to organize their training?
Yeah. I mean, don't overcomplicate it, right? It doesn't have to be complicated exercises all the time or anything like that. Keep it simple. I'm a big advocate for that because I know a lot of people they'll start, it's, with strength and conditioning, it's like the more you know, the less you know, right? Because you start going into this pool of all different types of strength and conditioning programs that you can go into. And it's just like, keep it simple. Just prioritize your sport and use strength training as a supplement. So it's not an everyday thing for most people. It'll probably be 3-4 times a week, depending on where you are in your season. Focus on movement patterns, focus on building strength for the demands of your sport, and prioritize recovery, because triathlon is a very volume heavy sport. So you're going to have to be smart on your approach with strength training. So some people can handle a little bit more. Some people have to handle a little bit less. So that's all individual to you. So pay attention to how you feel as you start implementing different movements and, programs and strength training and all that.
Yeah, no, I think that's super wise. Day, thank you so much for doing this today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening today. If you're someone who just started listening to the show, I would encourage you to subscribe so you can stay up to date. If you're someone who's been listening for a while, I would encourage you to rate and review the show. And lastly, the best thing that you can do to support our work is also the best thing that you can do for your performance. And that is by hiring one of our coaches. Until next time, stay the course.